Yep, nice, good contribution. Now,
Do you
Debbie
think we'll fit
says,
though with dresses on too?
yeah. Final proposal, because people have found it so interesting. My Kiwi husband and I met purely by chance at a small art bar in an art centre in Hong Kong. I was having a quick drink with a girlfriend on the small balcony before going to a show. He briefly came in to have a quick drink before attending a talk, never before going there. We had a brief chat, gave me his number, and soon after started dating. 2.5 months later, we went back for a quick drink before a special dinner and sat on the balcony again. He surprised me by proposing. I said yes. It'll always be a special place. We got married 6 months later, and I'm married 6 years, happily married in Tasman.
Oh,
Wow.
very cool.
Isn't that
Beautiful.
lovely?
Very cool.
Alan Blackman, Nawanta Samara Cohen, listeners, Sally, you've all been just fabulous. Thanks for being part of the show.
Thank you.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. And Haere Aki nei, ACT leader David Seymour on what he'll do if he's finance minister and dialing down tax promises because there's no money. Are banks doing enough to save their customers from scams? We talked to the former fund manager calling for an independent investigation. The recently departed Dunedin Deputy Mayor Sophie Barker on resignations and racism. Grip it and rip it, the 12-year-old from Tāneatua who took it to the next level, winning a national golf title after playing just three rounds of golf ever. And of course, we're living the dream on the campaign trail. Embrace, because there is another political poll. We'll bring you the results. You can watch us live on Freeview, Channel 50. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The National Party leader Chris Luxon is insisting his party's plan for a new medical school in Hamilton will provide more doctors for regional New Zealand than Labour's. The Labour Party today announced a policy that will provide an extra 335 doctors a year by 2027. This would mean 874 doctors going through the Auckland and Otago medical schools. That's about 100 more than National's policy, but Christopher Luxon says it's not the better option.
No, because we open up the 100 extra medical places at Auckland and Otago in 2025 and the medical school opens up in 2027. And the great thing about the third medical school is it's a graduate entry program, meaning it's a 4-year program, and importantly our students can go to that third medical school and they're going to do a lot of their training in regional New Zealand.
Christopher Luxon says Labour has taken too long to act on health workforce problems. Meanwhile, 5,000 senior doctors and dentists went on strike this morning for the second time in a month over their deadlocked pay talks. They say staff shortages mean they can't do their jobs properly. They plan to strike again next week. Labour Party leader Chris Hipkins has gone on the attack over the National Party's economic plans. National says it's reviewing its policies in light of yesterday's pre-election fiscal and economic update, but it's sticking with its plan for tax cuts. Chris Hipkins says National must show the costings behind its policies.
We're not talking technical numbers here, we are talking billions of dollars that they cannot account for. The removal of the foreign home buyer ban simply doesn't stack up. They've not found anybody that's argued that that would generate the sort of revenue that they think it will. Their increase in gambling also doesn't stack up, and nobody believes that that's credible.
Chris Hipkins says National also needs to explain which public services it plans to cut and which would be protected. David Seymour is confident the ACT Party's law and order policy can be paid for, despite a poor showing from the government's ledgers. ACT has announced it would add 500 prison beds at a cost of $1 billion if elected in October. It would also reinstate the 3 strikes law and impose tougher sentences for crimes on vulnerable workers, such as shopkeepers. Mr Seymour says ACT's expenditure is less than what Labour was planning to spend.
There's very few areas where we believe expenditure should increase. Those are teacher salaries, GPs, defence and corrections and sharing GST with councils for infrastructure, we believe we'll still be able to do those increases because in our alternative budget they're offset by savings elsewhere. And that includes increasing prison capacity.
You can hear from David Seymour on Checkpoint shortly. The Corrections Association says members urgently need better conditions and pay to address critical prison staffing levels. The union has been in mediated bargaining today with the Department of Corrections after rejecting a prisons collective agreement offer and giving notice of strike action. Association National President Floyd du Plessis says the current 4.5% pay increase won't help attract much needed staff.
We're sitting in a situation where we are under critical staffing at the moment. And so the prisons are getting dangerous. We're seeing that out in the community because unfortunately we're releasing prisoners into the community without the access to rehabilitation and programs that should be there because we just don't have enough staff.
Floyd du Plessis says they want to see a pay increase higher than inflation rates. And Napier City Council has backed down on the sale of a plot of land to Kaingaora after angry residents took legal action against the decision. About 200 residents were upset the council provisionally approved Kaingaora's plan to build 100 homes on the Prebison Drive without consultation. They sought a judicial review in December, which would have resulted in a High Court hearing later this year. But the council says it's withdrawn from the sale because its resources have been stretched since Cyclone Gabrielle and it's prioritising recovery efforts over the litigation. The council says it will consider future options for the land when it has more capacity. To sport, and All Blacks hooker Dane Coles has made peace with Steve Hansen after criticising his former coach for helping out Australia with their Rugby World Cup preparations. Coles reacted with disbelief 3 weeks ago when told Hansen had been advising the Wallabies for his friend Australia coach Eddie Jones. Hansen is with the All Blacks this week as they try to fix the issues exposed in their opening World Cup loss to France, and Coles says the pair have buried the hatchet.
He gave me a bit of stick yesterday, causing a bit of a scene, but yeah, no, it's good. He's been getting around a few players and just, giving them a bit of advice. But yeah, it's definitely, I suppose, lifted the spirits up after the loss to France.
The All Blacks' next World Cup game is against Namibia on Saturday. And the Black Caps ODI series with England is level at 1-1 heading into tonight's game at the Oval in London. The 4-match series is part of a warm-up for next month's 50-over World Cup in India. Trent Boult was the standout bowler in New Zealand's loss in Game 2 earlier this week and says his experience in T20 competitions has helped him prepare for the longer format.
2020 cricket is a really, really hard format, but I draw a lot of comparisons between T20 cricket and ODI cricket and find that it's basically just an extension of that 20-over format, really, and we're facing a lot of different conditions around the world, obviously slightly different rules, but batsmen seem to be coming at you extremely hard for the whole 50 overs.
Game 3 begins at 11:30 tonight. Koina ngā pita kōrero.
Calls for help from a flood-stricken Libya.
Ultimately, money will help, but right now they need shelter, they need homes, they need clean water, they need food.
Well, Labour stands by its spending.
People could make other choices, but those choices have consequences and they'll mean very deep cuts in public services.
As does National with its tax plan.
And they will get to know it, Coram, they'll get to know it before the voting starts, but I'm not going to do it a day after having seen pre-foo.
Always on the money. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Partly cloudy with isolated showers, mainly in the west. Showers becoming more widespread from Waitomo southwards tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly fine. A few cloudy areas today. Warm tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington and Waded Upper. Also for Nelson. Generally fine, but scattered showers tomorrow evening. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places later tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine today with the odd shower. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight and spreading elsewhere tomorrow with heavy falls. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places tomorrow. Southland and Otago, fine today, apart from a few showers about Stewart Island. Scattered rain tomorrow with gale westerlies in exposed places. Chatham Islands mainly fine with the odd shower. It is 7 minutes past 5. Our next traffic news and headlines are at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. FE's Finance Minister, David Seymour, is pledging to work tightly with the Nats to deliver on tax policy. But the ACT leader concedes his party will probably have to scale back its tax relief package because of the state of the government books, and National should be reviewing its promises too. The pre-election inspection of the country's finances revealed the deficit has ballooned to $11.4 billion from the previously forecast $7.6 billion, driven by a lower than expected tax take. Inflation isn't forecast to drop back to target levels until December next year, and interest rates won't ease till then either. And many economists say there's little fat for new government spending. ACT leader David Seymour concedes he'll probably have to walk back some of his party's promises.
We're interested in dropping rates rather than shifting brackets. We think ultimately New Zealand needs a lower, flatter, simpler tax system, but it might involve a transition which, first of all, takes longer until we get to that lower, flatter rate, unfortunately, and second of all, would shift some brackets in the short term. But, I mean, obviously it's a mathematical exercise and we're just working through, almost as we speak, people are working on what those numbers look like.
Should other politicians be doing the same?
Look, I think you have to accept that if there's been a big shock, and pre-FU is a big shock. I mean, if you look at where we'll be by 2026, $100 billion of debt, even on Grant Robertson's debt measure, $9.2 billion per year in interest payments, more than primary and secondary education, more than all of the law and order budget combined just on interest repayments, then you do have to take note of that and ask if the plans that you put in place can still be implemented.
So does that mean National's being overly optimistic and saying it can still afford $15 billion worth of tax package?
Well, I'm not here to attack or defend National, but let me just make one point for them, which is that their package really involves very limited reductions in spending, some reductions in tax, which are partially offset by increases in other taxes. Now, I know there's a huge debate around all three of those points, but, if I was to defend them, I'd say that there's probably quite a few moving parts, and I'm not sure that this data is totally fatal to what they've proposed.
Okay, so hypothetically, you could be Finance Minister at the end of next month. Would you be able to make that policy of theirs work and make the numbers add up?
Well, if I was the Finance Minister, and it's extremely hypothetical, bear in mind no one's even voted yet, then I think what we'd be looking at is working together very tightly and collegially with the Nats to see what we can make work, and we would be bringing some of ACT's values to the table, that we need lower, flatter taxes to make New Zealand competitive and more productive in the long term, but also we need to give tax relief to people who are pretty hard up right now, and balance the books in order to ensure that we take pressure off inflation and interest rates. Now, obviously, there's not a huge amount of space to be uncollegial in that. That's going to take some very hard and intense work, regardless of who the Finance Minister is, regardless of who the government is. But obviously, we'd like to see it being us, and that's why I asked people to give their party vote to ACT.
You have been talking a little bit this week about what a partnership with National might look like, right? And you mentioned the prospect that it could be a situation where you sign off on every little piece of government spending, so you just give them confidence. Has floating that idea raised concerns and muddied the water in terms about the stability of the kind of government you would be offering? Because people aren't familiar with that idea.
Yeah, I think some people have possibly overreacted to it. I mean, what I've been saying, and I want to say it again now for anyone who's unclear, is that our first priority is to change the government. I mean, that is absolutely critical. That's the first thing a party vote for ACT does. Our second priority is a tight working relationship with the Nats to make sure that this is not just, change Chris to Christopher and wear a blue tie on Monday. It's real change. And if you give your party vote to ACT, that's the second thing you're voting for. The third point I made is that no one's really been here before with two parties working in this sort of partnership. And, I think that we have to be prepared to turn down the baubles of office and say, okay, look, if you really don't want to play together, then we're prepared to, negotiate vote by vote. It'd be a very difficult situation for everyone involved. Certainly not our first preference. But yes, we're prepared to turn down the baubles of office rather than sell out the principles that people who vote for ACT would like, and that we believe New Zealand needs, you'll still have a change of government. It'll just be a more distant and more, I guess, case-by-case working relationship.
Do voters actually really want the level of change that you are offering? Because you talk there about change, but if they wanted change at the rate you are suggesting, then National wouldn't be in the 40s and ACT wouldn't be around 10%. Don't they want National with a little bit of a sprinkle of David Seymour and ACT?
Well, I mean, everyone's got their favourite poll, don't they? I could point to one that has National in the low 30s and ACT in the high teens, because that poll's real from last week too. But
they're still the senior partner, though, aren't they, David, in terms of those numbers? In terms of those numbers.
Okay, but when you have, at least 1 in 10, possibly as high as 1 in 5 New Zealanders going to a party like ACT, that is a pretty strong mandate that we want more than just to change the government. And when you ask people, and I think there was while we're trading in polls, another poll, would you like to see ACT as part of the partnership as well? That is a very popular idea with National voters too. So I think, you probably, your attempt to, peg the support for real change at the lowest number you can find from the last year or so is probably not a fair shake at how much change New Zealand needs and how much the New Zealand public appreciate that we need ACT in there to make sure that the change we get is not just a change of tie colour, but actually a change of direction.
David Seymour, ACT leader there. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 14 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. As senior doctors walked off the job for a second time this month, Labour leader Chris Hipkins promised to fund the training of more doctors if re-elected. The party has committed to significantly boosting the number of placements at the country's 2 medical schools by 2027. Mr Hipkins made the pledge during a day of campaigning in Dunedin, where he paid a visit to the Love Shack. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher was there.
Kia ora, how are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to the Love Shack. Thank you. Caitlin.
Thank you for welcoming us.
Labour leader Chris Hipkins embracing student life in Dunedin, visiting a flat called the Love Shack.
We'll do movie day, how about that? Rope you into rom-coms, yay!
It's on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Dusty Sunday rom-coms, so more than welcome to join.
The students interested but less enthused about Labour's plan to boost the health workforce by increasing the number of placements at Otago and Auckland's medical schools.
All up another 335 med school places, so it'll be a big expansion.
Yeah.
It's not just, that's obviously split between the 2 existing med schools, so they won't all be here in Dunedin, some of them will be in Auckland as well. Yeah, it'll be pretty big.
Wow, the cool students will be here. Yeah.
The number of spots across both schools is already set to increase by 50 at the start of 2024. Labour is promising to boost capacity at Auckland and Otago by a further 95 places every following year until 2027. Once fully implemented, 335 new doctors would be trained annually. The commitment comes with a hefty price tag, almost $1 billion over 10 years.
We believe it's absolutely essential that we do this. We know we're going to need more doctors.
Labour's promise comes as thousands of senior doctors and hospital dentists walked off the job over deadlocked pay negotiations. Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, Dr Julian Vyas, was on the picket line at Wellington Hospital. He's supportive of the plan to boost student numbers, but says it doesn't tackle the short-term challenges.
We estimate that we need 1,700 specialists now, specialist doctors and dentists. So we need those people yesterday.
Labour's health spokesperson Aisha Verrill says a long-term plan is critical.
All of those doctors striking today will tell you that a lot of the pressure on them is due to workforce shortages. We have to have a sustainable long-term plan to get us back on track with that respect. Pay and conditions is absolutely part of that.
Labour's policy is in direct competition with National's plan to open a 3rd medical school at Waikato University. The school, which would cost about $300 million to establish, would train 120 doctors a year from 2027. National leader Christopher Luxon insists his party's got the better plan.
And the great thing about the third medical school is it's a graduate entry program, meaning it's a 4-year program. And importantly, our students can go to that third medical school and they're going to do a lot of their training in regional New Zealand.
Unsurprisingly, the Dean of Auckland's Medical School, John Fraser, favours Labour's policy.
This would start immediately, so you would realise the increasing numbers are much, much faster than having to wait to develop an entirely new medical program.
With both major parties' plans to increase the health workforce released, voters can now decide which one they prefer.
Katie Scotcher with that report. At least 5,000 people are feared dead and 10,000 reported missing in devastating floods that have hit Libya. A massive storm ripped through the east of the country, bursting dams, washing away buildings and destroying entire neighbourhoods. Libya is a nation torn apart by political division and crumbling infrastructure, and it doesn't have the resources to cope with a major disaster. World Watch's Andrew McRae filed this report.
The eastern city of Derna appears to be the worst hit by Storm Daniel, where 2 dams collapsed, sending a tsunami-like surge of water hurtling into the city, sweeping away all in its path. Audio on social media giving a sense of the shock as people watched the sheer volume of water ripping through the town. The head of the Libyan Armed Forces, Khalifa Haftar, says it's almost impossible to accurately assess the extent of the devastation.
The number of affected people is very high. The damage is huge. It's hard to describe or measure it.
The focus is now shifted to disaster response. The head of the International Red Cross in Libya, Tama Ramadan, says rescue teams face huge challenges.
Access to the affected areas is not easy. Also, the collapse of the health facilities is a big challenge, that there is no access to basic health services in the affected cities. Communication is another big challenge.
The lack of any real medical infrastructure prompted this plea from a doctor in Derna.
We are still looking for the victims. We call on all Libyans, anyone who has a degree or any medical affiliation, to please come and help us. We have a shortage of nurses. We need help.
While the devastation is clear to see, the death toll is harder to quantify. The country hasn't had one single functioning government since Muammar Gaddafi was deposed as Libya's leader in 2011. It's politically divided with 2 governments. Ishay Mushawar is a minister in the Eastern Government and was in Derna when the storm struck.
It resulted in the collapse of one of the water dams located in the south of the city, dragging large parts of it into the sea, and resulted in a complete destruction of water networks, and the massive neighborhood has been vanished and destroyed.
Despite warnings of the approaching storm, residents were not evacuated. Rescue teams are now beginning efforts to deliver urgently needed emergency relief to devastated areas. Planes carrying medical supplies, doctors and body bags have arrived in the city of Benghazi. The UN-backed Libyan Prime Minister Abdul Hamid El Dabeiba says recovering bodies from the sea is the priority.
We do not need aid, not even medication or equipment, nor doctors or ambulances. Thanks to God, we have 400 ambulances that took off, but we have a problem in retrieving the bodies from the sea. The Libyan Navy and divers are putting all their efforts into retrieving the bodies.
A Libyan analyst, Anas Al-Ghamati, says the rival factions in the country are to blame for the scale of the disaster.
It not only could have been avoided because we had hours and days to be able to plan for this, but the response now is lacking. The response is absolutely, it's terrible, and it's a shame that we're still talking about these factions that have been fighting for a decade, but not governing for it responsibly for a decade.
A Libyan living in this country says the scale of the devastation in his homeland is heartbreaking. Bahar Mabruk says it's difficult to comprehend.
I was in a total shock. I completely stunned, really. And the news that we get from there, no one could confirm any numbers, but the numbers are horrendous, and you can't even think about those numbers. It's just it's unbelievable.
He says the Libyan community in New Zealand is small, and they're in the dark on how many people are affected. The Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand is raising funds for those hit by the floods. Spokesperson Abdur Razak says the community is getting together to pray and collect donations for victims.
We all know the suffering, what happens after such disasters. We had Cyclone Gabriel here. They've just had the Storm Danielle there, and obviously our prayers are for those who are suffering, and we are trying to do as best we can to materially help them.
RNZ approached the Libyan embassy in Canberra for comment. The reply thanked us for our kind consideration, but no further comment was forthcoming.
It is 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaara, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far. A lot of you getting in touch about our interview with the ACT leader David Seymour. We'll get to some of that feedback shortly. If you would like to add your thoughts to the conversation, text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
ACT leader David Seymour told Checkpoint he's prepared to turn down the baubles of government rather than sell out its principles. But he has admitted his party would probably have to scale back its tax relief package if in government. Yesterday's pre-election inspection showed the deficit ballooning to $11.4 billion with no return to surplus until 2026-2027. Labour's promising to train 335 extra doctors a year by 2027. That would mean 874 students going through the country's 2 medical schools at Auckland University and Otago University. National has said it would spend $300 million on a new medical school at the University of Waikato, which would train 120 doctors annually from 2027 and pay for 50 more places at Otago and Auckland. More than 5,000 members of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists walked out for 2 hours this morning in their ongoing pay dispute. It's their second action in a month, and they say they're prepared to do it again next week. The Corrections Association has also given notice of strike action in its pay dispute. The association has today been in mediated bargaining with the Department of Corrections, saying its current offer won't encourage recruitment amid critical prison staffing levels. And Russian leader Vladimir Putin is at the Vostochny Space Centre in the country's far east, where he'll meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It's understood North Korea will sell weapons in exchange for Russian aid. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, the Karangahake Gorge State Highway 2 is closed after a serious single vehicle crash this afternoon. There's a long diversion in place over the Kaimais to get between Waihi and Pairoa. And in the South Island, there's still plenty of snow on the Milford Road, State Highway 94. The road is closed and will stay closed tomorrow because of a high avalanche warning and expected heavy snowfall. Reopening time at this stage is probably midday Friday. Our next traffic news and headlines is at about 20 to 6.
Kia ora rā eho. Former All Blacks coach Sir Steve Hansen caused a bit of a stir when he joined the Wallabies a few weeks ago. Now he's back in familiar territory. Hansen is in the All Blacks camp in Lyon at the request of coach Ian Foster as they prepare for their second Rugby World Cup game on Saturday. And we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Wow, so many questions, Felicity. Has he been forgiven for linking up with the Aussies, and was this also the plan for him to be in camp at Lyon?
It appears so. So speaking today, he had mentioned that this had been pre-planned with Ian Foster. But if we actually go by All Blacks hooker Dane Coles, who was one of the most shocked players when it found out that he'd spent a week with the Wallabies prior to the World Cup. So actually these two have a bit of history. Hansen was the World Cup winning coach when Coles was part of the 2015 team. So with keeping that in mind, that was probably part of his shock. But now that they've sort of had this reuniting in Lyon, they have buried the hatchet and they've quite a little bit of ribbing for Coles as well, considering they've seen it as him making a bit of a scene about the going to the Wallabies, and probably thought he made a little bit too much out of it. And so in an interview shared by New Zealand Rugby, here is why Hansen says he's back.
It's just being around the boys and seeing how they are and how they're coping and talking to the coaches, and it's like, when I went and visited Australia, that's like seeing your cousins, but this is like seeing your real family. And I think they're in good shape. I think, I know a lot of people have read into the fact they didn't beat South Africa and they lost to France, but the reality is they've got to make the quarterfinals, and that's going to be a massive game when they do. So nothing's changed, has it?
So this wasn't really an official role, a little bit like when he was with the Wallabies. It's more of an observation, share his thoughts type of thing. And because he's got so much experience, the All Blacks are probably going to need that as they try and resurrect their World Cup campaign ahead of Namibia on Saturday.
And America's Cup racing returns this week. What? It feels like, is it every season is America's Cup season?
It has been a little while. Team New Zealand haven't actually competitively been on the water since March 2021 when they retained the America's Cup back here in Auckland. So for them, this is actually the first of 3 compulsory preliminary regattas ahead of the next America's Cup cycle. So they're going to do that in Spain. So this is the first one that's sailed in an AC40. So it's that smaller boat than the AC75, which they race for the America's Cup. So there's actually only 4 people on board for this. There's a little bit of familiarity around the sailors that we'll see for this as well, for the New Zealand team. But it's actually all 6 challenges for the next America's Cup will be on the line. So that's New Zealand, and then Ineos Britannia, Alinghi Red Bull Racing, Luna Rossa, American Magic, and the Orient Express Racing, which is the newest edition out of France. So they'll all be competing for this. It is 3 days of fleet racing. There is a winner, none of which actually happens here contributes towards the actual America's Cup. But for them, it's a little bit of a bragging rights, an early marker in the competition as well, considering the America's Cup isn't actually until next year. But they don't actually get much opportunity to race against each other, so they'll be doing that, and then in a couple of months they get another opportunity and maybe that controversial racing in Jeddah, and then they go back to Barcelona, and that'll be in August next year. So there's a little bit of racing before we get to the proper big boy America's Cup racing as well.
Thank you, Felicity. That is our sports reporter, Felicity Reid. A financial expert is calling for the Ombudsman to investigate alleged failings by banks in protecting customers from scams. Former fund manager Janine Starks believes there are systematic failures in the banking system here, and the industry has fallen short of its duty to customers by failing to have robust enough security systems. Well, Janine Starks joins us now. Kia ora, Janine.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thanks. In a nutshell, what do you reckon the failings are on the part of the banks?
Right, well, it all comes down to their security systems, and they are outdated. So we're looking at our payment system being old, probably 15 years behind the UK, 5 years behind Australia. That's the first failing, and that's caused a lot of these fake term deposit scams to be allowable to happen by the fraudsters. The second thing is banks are not employing basic fraud methods and skills. And the industry is actually, in my view, entirely ignoring international best practice.
Okay, because the thing is, when a customer makes a decision to transfer money to a scamster, that's a failure of judgment or, being sucked into a scam. How is that a systems failure? They're making a transfer.
Yeah, no, and that's how most people see it on the surface, and it's why we get so much shame and embarrassment and people hiding the fact that they have been scammed. And look, I just want to sort of turn that one on its head for you. The way I explain it to people is that fraud doesn't actually target people, it targets the payment system. So people are just the conduit. And every scheme has its origin in some sort of weakness in the payments system. So as a fraudster sits there and decides, how do I get money? The entire thing is about putting the banking system first and finding the holes that exist within it in order to do the social engineering to convince that customer to hand over money. So we need to stop letting the banks put themselves at the end of the chain, which is where they will say they are, and they'll victim blame and tell people that they are the people that have made the bad judgments, and now why should they have to repay the money? We have to turn that on its head and say, hang on, all fraud targets the payment system. That's what they're aiming for,
so,
and
Janine,
we have to close all those holes.
So sorry to interrupt, but when you say closing the holes, does that mean that people should not be able at all ever to transfer large amounts of money electronically, or where do you see the stopgaps being?
Okay, so let me give you an example. One of the major holes, and this isn't the only one in the system at the moment, is within our payment system. So it's old. It doesn't work on the correct technology that overseas countries are using, and it doesn't allow the banks to match the name that you input into that field when you make your payment with the account number. So if you're trying to pay me at my bank account, you're putting in my name, but and the banks in quite a misleading way are asking you to put my name into the system, and that makes you believe that they're checking, does that name match that account number? They're not. The payment system is so antiquated, they can only transfer my account number and the amount of money to the other bank. So the other bank doesn't even have a chance to check, is that really the person you're trying to pay? So if you're transferring that really large amount of money, the banks leave it to your own risk and liability that you've got it right. Now, that's not good enough. It doesn't happen in other countries. We have a matching system.
So potentially someone could have been fed a name which is very close to a legitimate business, and they believe when the transfer goes through on that account number using that name that there's been a cross-check done when actually there hasn't.
Yeah, there hasn't. So, and it doesn't even have to be a close name. Look, you can try it out. You can try and pay your mum tonight and write the word Mickey Mouse on it and the account name, and it will go through. It doesn't. They don't even have to make any attempt at getting even close to the name.
Janine,
it's a major fault.
We are almost out of time, but I want to know, you're working with a few people. Is it likely there could be a class action on the cards?
I think very likely the banks are in a real position here. They are holding their ground. They don't want to admit liability. They have the Ombudsman in a position where they're actually, the service is cornered. They have a terms of reference that they can't find their way around or are struggling to, even though these people have complained to the Ombudsman. So, there's some things about that system that don't work well for consumers as well. So that's the next step for these people. And I think perhaps we do need a class action in New Zealand. We need to get this through the court system. I think they'd be very foolish to let it go that far. And they would be best to settle these cases. But, I don't know how stubborn they're feeling about it.
Appreciate your time, Janine. That is Janine Starks, who is a former fund manager, calling for an independent investigation into the banks over scams. It is 26 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tōne mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I nai call Nona Peltier, who is in the studio. Okay, food prices, annual food prices on the up and up again, with grocery items leading the way. What are the numbers, Nona?
Okay, let's go through them quickly. 8.9% increase on the year earlier. That's for the August prices. Now, that's the lowest annual increase since September last year. So last year at this time, roughly, we were looking at an increase of 9.6%. Now it's gone to about 8.9. So a little bit slower, but still pretty high. And what's leading the way? I guess no one will be surprised by this. It will be fresh eggs is one of the big ticket items.
Checkpoint knows that.
Potato chips, a bag of potato chips. A 6-pack of yogurt is another big price increase there. And the main food groups, we've got restaurant meals, ready-to-eat food prices. The second main influence, also an increase of 8.9%. And there were other increases as well. Non-alcoholic beverages, 9.1%. But hey, fruit and vegetables, just an increase there of 5.4%. Still pretty pricey if you ask me. So is it slowing down? Well, let's hope.
Briscoe's Group, its profit is down, tight margins and flat sales. What did it make?
It made $42.7 million, which is pretty darn good, but that's still a drop of 6% on the year earlier. So that's a half-year number, and basically it was in line with their guidance, pretty close. The managing director, Rod Duke, said it's a pretty good result, all in all, but basically we're talking about flat sales, shrinking margins, and of course, as a result, a lower growth in profit. So no growth in profit.
Okay, gallop round the markets for us, Nona.
Let's do that. So never mind that the profit wasn't what, has been in past. The market still liked the result, and the share price closed up 2.22%, which is pretty darn good. Again, the New Zealand Top 50 Index, it rose 0.5%, helped along there by Briscoe's result. Up 58 points to 11,357. The New Zealand dollar, once again, steady at 59 cents, 92 Australian and 47.2 pence. But what we're seeing here is just ahead of some very important data coming out of the United States overnight. It's their inflation data. The whole market's bracing for that because that's going to determine what happens with interest rates. And what we have also seen just over today was Brent crude futures settling at $92.24 US a barrel, which is about a 10-month high. So there's a lot going on, and we'll just keep following.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. A 12-year-old Bay of Plenty schoolboy won a national golf title after playing just 3 rounds of the game in his life. Bailey Tepataro nailed the 9-hole golf competition at the Ames Inter-School Games in Tauranga with a Stapleford score of 87 last week. And if you don't play golf, apparently that is amazing. And the story of this amazing 12-year-old is spreading fast. Bailey is from Taniatua, and it doesn't even have a golf course. But together with his schoolmates, Pedro Robinson and Lincoln Reretito, they also won the team's gold too. Fetu Widamu, a teacher aide, got him into the game after Bailey, who has autism, was struggling a bit, sitting under his desk and not really speaking to anyone. But Coach Fetu and golf has changed things. I caught up with him and the whole team a little earlier.
Oh, it was pretty much during Bailey's last round. There was a few guys that ran the tournament. They were saying, "Oh, bro, no one's gonna catch up to this fella. He's too ahead of everyone else." And I was just like, "Oh," at the moment in time, I couldn't really process it. But towards the end, when he made his final putt, I was just like, "Bro," I went up to him and I told him the good news, and this was his response to me. I don't know if he remembers, but he was going, "Did I actually win?" And I said, "Oh, bro, it's a good chance that you might have just won," because yeah. So he was super happy about that, and when we were walking back to the clubhouse, he was pretty happy. He was like sprinting back with his trundler and his golf club. So it was a pretty happy moment, pretty cool moment.
I can see your medals, guys. Would you mind holding them up so we can see them a little better? Wow. That is pretty cool. So Bailey's got 2, and Pedro and Lincoln, you've got 1 as well. Maybe, Pedro, can you tell me what it was like to be on the golf course?
Nervous. Fun.
What do you like about golf?
Meeting new people.
And Lincoln, hiding in the back there, show us your medal. And can you tell me, how long have you been playing golf for?
3 weeks.
How many weeks? Can you lean in so we can hear you? How many weeks?
3 weeks.
3 weeks? How did you guys get so good so fast?
It's because of our teacher.
Yeah.
Our coach.
Your coach, Coach Fetu, made you good, did he?
Yeah. Didn't do anything.
Yes.
Oh, but Masa Mickey coached him.
Hey, Fetu, why did you think golf would be good for these students?
I don't know. They just... Obviously, every kid likes whacking things. So, I don't know. I just thought that introducing them to the game, they'd like it. Because obviously myself, I started playing golf about 9 to 10 months ago now. And obviously I enjoy it. And I just wanted them to experience something else other than their normal sports like rugby and touch and netball and stuff. So just trying to, just introduce them into it, and they ended up loving it. Yeah.
Bailey?
Yeah?
Bailey, can you tell me how you feel when you play golf?
I feel happy.
Tell me about that. What other feelings do you have when you're out there playing golf?
Like enjoy the game.
And whose clubs did you play with?
Our coaches.
Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah, to ask
so Bailey used my golf clubs for the tournament. Yeah.
And you asked your mates to lend the other boys some clubs?
Yeah.
Oh, that is fantastic. Hey, but I hear the legend of your golf team is spreading and someone might have offered some clubs. Is that right?
Yep.
What's happening, Whetu?
Oh, so, there's been a couple people reaching out to provide these boys with some sets. Yeah. The contractors here in our local whakatane have reached out to Bailey to buy him his own personal set. And, a couple other companies have reached out to buy the kura some golf clubs to start a bit of a golf program here in Taneata for them. So that's pretty amazing for our little school.
Before we go, Lincoln, I can't play golf, so could you give me a tip? Just one tip, one thing I could do to play golf better.
Make a L shape with your keep your first straight and bend your legs.
Awesome. So I might be able to hit the ball if I do that, because not really working for me at the moment. Oh, you've got one too, Pedro. Okay, go.
Matua Mickey taught me this when we were at the driving range.
Got some actions.
So he said like stare at the ball.
So stick my backside out and put my hands forward. Yeah.
And imagine this is like a club like there.
Yeah.
So you go like this, and then you turn the club like that way.
Yeah.
And like that, and then you go like that. And then whack it as hard as you can.
Okay, whack it as hard as you can. I'm going to give it a crack. You guys are absolute champions. You've made my day. It is so nice to talk to you. Double thumbs up. You're amazing, guys. Keep at it.
Not too much.
Yeah, you too. Take care. See you later. Ka kite. And that was the amazing golf team from Taneatua School with their coach Whetu there. That was Bailey, Lincoln and Pedro. It is almost 5:45. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie is standing by. Anea Evie, mina pita kōrero.
The Corrections Association says prisoners are being released without having access to rehabilitation programs because there aren't enough staff to run them. The union has today been in mediated bargaining with the Department of Corrections after rejecting a prisons collective agreement pay offer and giving notice of strike action. Food price inflation has slowed to its lowest level in almost a year, but grocery items, including dairy, are keeping prices high overall. Stats NZ says in August they were 8.9% higher than at the same time last year. Westpac senior economist Satish Ranchod says the economy is slowing down, but many families are still feeling the pressure. A man charged with the murder of a woman in West Auckland on Monday has been granted interim name suppression. The 29-year-old appeared in Waitakere District Court this morning. 27-year-old Natsia Hai was stabbed in Te Atatu. Islamic associations are raising funds for those affected by the floods in Libya, where thousands of people have been killed and about 10,000 are still missing. The Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand spokesperson Abdul Razak says mosques all over the country will be united this Friday, collecting donations and holding prayers. And a video published on the Kremlin's official Telegram channel shows North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin shaking hands. The two men are at the Vostochny Space Centre in Russia's Far East, where they are due to hold talks over aid and weapons. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. In Auckland, State Highway 1 heading south away from the city on the southern motorway, a crash is blocking the right southbound lane after Gillies Ave. In the Bay of Plenty, a serious single vehicle crash this afternoon has closed Karangahaki Gorge between Normandy Road and Dean Crescent on State Highway 2. There's a long diversion in place over the Kaimais to get between Waihi and Paidua. And in the South Island, Milford Road, State Highway 94 is closed and will stay closed tomorrow, probably reopening midday Friday because of a high avalanche warning and expected heavy snowfall. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The Dunedin mayor has moved quickly to replace his outgoing deputy, who's resigned over the handling of a racist incident. Sophie Barker handed her notice in after filing an official complaint about Mayor Jules Raddick's conduct and how he managed accusations of racist abuse by the Strathtyre Community Board Chair Barry Williams. The council wrote to Mr Williams asking him to consider stepping down after he directed a racial slur at a pub worker. He hasn't. Yesterday, Councillor Cherry Lucas was appointed as the new Deputy Mayor. Joining us now to shed more light on the situation is former Deputy Sophie Barker, who still remains a councillor. Kia ora, Sophie.
Kia ora, how are you?
I'm good. Why did you resign?
Well, generally I had a good relationship with the Mayor and there was a good positive feeling at the table, but there'd been a series of incidents going off script with things like, I think some of them happened on RNZ, misspeaking about climate change and sea level, Kettle Park landfill and other council positions, but, you know, the final straw was the magnitude of the error over a really serious issue to us all, which was the racial slur. And as council, we'd condemned that hugely. So it breached confidentiality and it broke the council's agreed position. And then there's my personal stand on the issue. You know, racism, sexism, and insults are completely unacceptable wherever they might happen. And I guess another reason is, you know, the mayor works closely with the deputy mayor and they need to be more politically aligned. So my resignation gave space for this to happen.
So, Sophie, just to be clear, there is a list there of things, but in respect of the racist comments, was it your feeling that the mayor played those down and dismissed them publicly?
That's what happened on the RNZ interview, and that's pretty heartbreaking.
How do you think that reflected on the council?
Well, the council had made their position clear about it, but I think that it didn't reflect well on the whole council because the mayor speaks for the council.
Okay, so how many code of conduct complaints have you made?
I've made 2 because there's the first one, which is really about breaching our governance pillars. And then there is another one because of another councillor's behaviour over the weekend following that first code of complaint where I had, I think, Councillor Amanda had 8 calls. Oh, no, I had 12 calls and I had 8, and then there was 17 texts. And it was pretty hard considering that actually maybe 3 or 4 people might have known what was in the code of conduct complaints.
So, Sophie, I just need to be clear on this. When you say you've made a second conduct complaint, it relates to another councillor.
Yes,
over
that's correct.
Actions? Over what actions?
It was about, I guess you would call it, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find where the code is. It was about their actions over the weekend.
Were the texts from that councillor, Sophie?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, the texts are from the councillor and the calls are from the councillor, etc., and it was quite over the top and not really. A code of conduct is about how we treat each other and how we respect each other, and I feel that it breached that.
Would you regard those texts as abusive?
They were pretty unpleasant.
Can you be more specific?
I can't because it's subject to a code of conduct. So I can't talk about them. I can talk about the way that they made me feel.
Okay, how did they make you feel, Sophie?
Incredibly harassed and upset. And that's not the way that one councillor should treat another. That's not the way that any person should treat another person. So that's, you know, one code of conduct led to the other code of conduct. Of, you know, it feels terrible to put 2 in one week, but, you know, we have standards that we have to uphold.
So how would you describe the culture in the council then?
I think generally we have a pretty good culture. I think it's that we need for people to understand what our code of conduct is, and we need for our community to be able to trust us and see that we're upholding good standards. We saw an oath to uphold our code of conduct and be good leaders, and I think that's what we're just trying to iron out at the moment.
Thank you for speaking with us, Sophie. That is Sophie Barker, who is the former Deputy Mayor of Dunedin, who has filed, as she said there, 2 Code of Conduct complaints. It is 9 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tōne mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Skiers and snowboarders have enjoyed some of the best snow at Ruapehu in years after a rocky start to the season. Ruapehu Alpine Lifts is in liquidation and only got the go-ahead for the season at the 11th hour. While the snow has been plentiful this season, that hasn't translated into bumper business at the base of the slopes. Tom Taylor reports.
They've got more snow up there now than almost anywhere else in the world. So if you want to play in the snow and you want to go skiing or boarding, wow, what more could you ask for?
That's Ohakune travel agent Nigel Buck. He says the conditions at Turoa this year have been second to none, and he's got the stats to back it up. In August, the southern Ruapehu ski field boasted the deepest base of snow in the world at 255 centimetres. Compare that to last year when La Niña weather systems produced some of the shoddiest snow in recent memory.
Put it this way, it's much more cheerful around town this season than it has been for the last 3.
Still, it's not the Ruapehu it once was. Gear rentals from off-piste mountain hire, even on the best bluebird days, are down about 30% on previous year's best days. Owner Johnny Vod says it's better than being closed, but a far cry from normal.
There's really good snow, but it's not the traditional numbers I've seen in the past. And even people going up the mountain have commented that, how quiet it is compared to normal for the quality snow.
He blames the high cost of living, with the price of fuel just to get to the mountain now a big barrier. And he says uncertainty at the start of the season didn't help. After the liquidation of Ruapehu Alpine Lifts, season pass sales were only open for a fortnight, and many who would ordinarily buy them held off. Johnny says the future of Mount Ruapehu's still up in the air, and that doesn't give local businesses much confidence. When I meet him, he's about to head out on his second job as a tradie.
I do have backup, so if you've got backup, you're certainly in a better position than people solely relying on the mountain. And I've been here long enough, including through the eruption years, to know that you need more than just reliance on the mountain.
At Ohakune's Utopia Cafe, Helen Zing says business is down about 15% on last year when the snow was terrible.
I think everybody's up the mountain this year, so they probably spent the whole day on the mountain. As a cafe, we're open daytime, so we don't really get people during the daytime.
She says people spend a lot on the mountain, forking out $149 for an adult weekend day pass, and that doesn't include ski hire. So on days off, they're tightening their belts.
You spend ski pass, your accommodation here, and your dinner, and probably people come in just grab a coffee and go. Definitely have less meals than previous years.
But just 25 minutes north in National Park Village, chair of the National Park Business Association and Visit Ruapehu board member Andrea Messenger says it's a different story. She says the town near Whakapapa ski field has had a boost in numbers, but not from where you might expect.
People that are touching snow for the very first time, so a lot of New Zealanders are coming through. They will spend quite a bit of time in Happy Valley, either tobogganing or learning to ski, and people will definitely experience going up on the gondola.
About 60% of visitors are now coming to the mountain for sightseeing or playing in the snow at the top of this lift, leaving the slopes wide open for skiers and snowboarders, making up the other 40%. With both fields estimated to stay open past Labour Day, the businesses below will be hoping to turn the season's snowfall into a windfall.
South Dunedin residents are coming to terms with the hazards facing their community. The South Dunedin Basin, home to more than 13,000 people, is at risk from climate change, flooding and rising groundwater. Tonight, residents can hear directly from the scientists about what the challenges are that they will be facing at a public meeting. Tess Brunton is in South Dunedin.
In a city of hills, South Dunedin sits in a former coastal wetland. South Dunedin resident Eleanor Doig is aware of the risks, but loves her diverse community where she has made her home for the past 12 years.
People here will often hear rain on the roof at night and start worrying about what's happening. The groundwater level is certainly high. I dug a hole in our garden the other day and the water's not far below.
The area hit headlines back in 2015 when 2 months of rain in a single day overwhelmed drainage systems, flooding homes and forcing evacuations. Eleanor Doig says that's when the council started to slowly ramp up its engagement with the community. She's looking forward to speaking to the scientists tonight.
They've wanted to be able to see and hear some of the options, because back in 2015, when the mayor at the time mistakenly said we're going to be looking at managed retreat, everybody panicked because they thought that that was going to mean the whole of South Dunedin is going to disappear, and that just isn't on the cards anymore.
Last week, the council revealed it was investigating a proposal to buy at-risk properties on the open market, gradually acquiring them over the decades to help with their adaptation efforts. Eleanor Doig is a fan, particularly with many vulnerable people in the area.
If a property comes up for sale in an area that is known to be at risk of flooding, for the DCC to buy it and rent it seems a much better idea than just waiting till some future date and then just forcing people out of homes.
Resident Raywin Orkram loves living in her community. It's easy to get around as someone with lower vision.
We'd like to stay here. We're in an old house. We've been here 30 years. And we'd just like to be able to stay if we can, but whether that's possible, I don't know.
Another local resident who asked not to be named expects many will be keen to stay and hopes improving stormwater will be on the cards.
It's an established precinct. I don't think anyone that's invested here, very few of them will feel inclined to pack up and bugger off.
The Dunedin City Council and Otago Regional Council are working to create a strategy to help the community adapt to climate change over the next few years. South Dunedin Future Program Manager Jonathan Rose says the solutions range from fight to flight.
In an infrastructure sense, pumps, pipes, seawalls and the like, nature-based solutions like parks, wetlands, even daylighting streams or streams that used to be there, and all the way through to managed retreats or relocations, so looking at areas that might be really high risk now or in the future and looking at how do you move people out of harm's way.
Jonathan Rose says it could mean also intensifying safer areas with better housing. He hopes plenty of people will share their thoughts.
We've heard really strongly that people want to stay, so a lot of what we're looking at is how could we enable them to stay safely, stay for as long as they can and sort of live in a better and safer way.
A Meet the Scientist night is on at Nations Church from 7 o'clock tonight. All residents can grab a sausage and attend a street meet next Saturday on the King Edward Street shopping strip. Dunedin City Council is expected to consider a list of potential solutions for approval for consultation by the end of the year.
And that was Tess Brunton reporting. OK, a lot of you getting in touch about our earlier interview with the ACT leader, David Seymour. These two comparing him with, well, different animals. The first, what a rooster, crowing and strutting around the farmyard. David, you're not there yet, and you may have overestimated the country's appetite for change. But on the other hand, this listener says, David is the GOAT. ACT rocks. And a reference by a few of you to him talking about the baubles of office. This listener says, listening to David Seymour happily turning down the baubles of office reminds me of Winston Peters. Maybe David and Winston are closer than they think. Another says, ACT has policies to impoverish the already poor and enrich the wealthy. Their confidence without supply is channeling the current US House of Representatives' threat to shut down the US government unless the nation submits to minority rule. RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Paul Marie ko Iwi Ashton tēnei. The University of Auckland's medical school is backing Labour's plan to increase the number of doctors trained each year by more than 300 by 2027, taking the total to 874. The Dean, John Fraser, says the policy would provide more doctors than the 285 more per year recommended by a recent review of the health workforce.
It's very impressive. It's something that we have been pushing for as a medical program, one of the two in New Zealand, for quite some time, both through National and through Labour, and it's pretty exciting to see the realisation.
John Fraser says Labour's plan would deliver more doctors faster than National's policy of increasing med school intakes and creating a third medical school at the University of Waikato. Midwives are criticising Labour's health workforce plan as light on detail when it comes to fixing critical shortages in midwifery. The head of the College of Midwives, Alison Eddy, says today's announcement includes plans to boost training places and reduce attrition. But unlike medical and nursing student places, there's no special target for midwifery. She says midwives are perplexed by this, considering their area has the greatest critical shortage, an estimated 40% gap. Ms Eddy notes the Labour Party is promising promising to explore regulatory changes to enable overseas educated midwives to practice in this country. But she says improving conditions is the best way to get a sustainable and homegrown workforce. Meanwhile, senior hospital doctors warn staff shortages mean they can't do their jobs properly. More than 5,000 senior doctors and dentists went on strike this morning for the second time in a month over their deadlocked pay talks. Palliative care specialist Sinead Donnelly, who was on the picket line in Wellington today, says they're beyond stretched.
We're kind of the bottom of the barrel, and it's assumed that we just keep going, but we can't keep going. We're going to fall over. We're already falling over. And I love medicine. I love caring for patients. I love supporting their families, but I'm exhausted, I'm worn out, and I'm not able to do as good a job as I could if it was more supported and if we were more valued.
Dr. Donnelly says they need those in authority to listen. David Seymour is confident his law and order policy can be paid for, despite Treasury's books showing a less than shiny outlook. The ACT Party has announced it would add 500 prison beds at a cost of $1 billion if it's elected in October. It would also reinstate the 3 strikes law and impose tougher sentences for crimes on vulnerable workers, including shopkeepers. Mr Seymour told Checkpoint ACT's expenditure is less than what Labour was planning to spend because of savings it would make elsewhere. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and the Russian President Vladimir Putin have met at the Vostochny Space Center in Russia's Far East, where they are due to hold talks. A video published on the Kremlin's official Telegram channel shows the men shaking hands. The BBC's Jenna McKenzie reports.
The US believes Mr. Kim is preparing to sell Russia the ammunition and artillery it needs for its war in Ukraine. In return, he's expected to ask Mr. Putin to share advanced weapons technology. This makes the Vostochny Space Center a significant meeting point. One of the areas where Mr. Kim is struggling to make progress is his space program. He's tried twice in the past 6 months to put a spy satellite into orbit and failed. While Mr. Putin may be reluctant to hand over such sensitive information, it doesn't hurt to send the message that both sides are prepared to support each other militarily.
A former fund manager says New Zealand banks are years behind their overseas counterparts when it comes to security. Janine Starks said there are systematic failures, with local payments systems, about 15 years behind United Kingdom banks and 5 years behind Australian institutions. But she says it's usually customers who are blamed when they fall for scams. Janine Starks says a class action lawsuit could be on the cards to ensure banks take more responsibility. Food price inflation has slowed to its lowest level in almost a year, but grocery food items, including dairy, are keeping prices high overall. Stats NZ says in August they were 8.9% higher than the same time last year. Westpac senior economist Satish Ranchod says the economy is slowing down, but many families are still feeling the pressure.
Over the past year, we've seen some big increases related to things like inclement weather. Those increases are starting to ease back. Some prices for items like dairy products are also coming down, but prices are still a lot higher than they were 1 year ago.
Satish Ranchod says inflation is past its peak and will continue to trend down, but it will be slow progress. And a South Dunedin resident says she remains optimistic about the future of her area, which is at risk from climate change, flooding and rising groundwater. Local councils are creating a strategy to help residents adapt to climate change. More than 13,000 people live in the South Dunedin basin. Eleanor Doig says it's important they have their say and are well informed about the risks and possible solutions.
They've wanted to be able to see and hear some of the options, because back in 2015, when the mayor at the time mistakenly said we're going to be looking at managed retreat, everybody panicked because they thought that that was going to mean the whole of South Dunedin is going to disappear.
Residents can hear from the scientists about what challenges their community is facing at a public meeting at Nations Church from 7 o'clock tonight. In news just to hand, the National Party has gained again in the latest One News Varian poll, but its potential governing partner ACT has seen the biggest drop in support. National is up 2 points on 39%, while ACT is down 3 points to 10%. On these numbers, National and ACT remain on course to form a government. Support for Labour is down 1 point to 28%, while the Greens have fallen 2 points to 10%. Meanwhile, New Zealand First is on track to return to Parliament, with the party now polling at the required 5% threshold. That's the news.
Tomorrow after 1pm, a listener writes to personal finance expert Mary Holmes saying he has life insurance, vehicle insurance, contents insurance, medical insurance and pet insurance. And he wants to know, does he have too much or just the right amount of coverage? Her response after 3, plus we play Link 3, and in our series on sporting history, Freda Dufour, the first woman to climb Aoraki Mount Cook. That's on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan from 1pm tomorrow on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Nā te irirangi te motu te putia tautoko. You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint. Next, right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Partly cloudy with isolated showers, mainly in the west. Showers becoming more widespread from Waitomo southwards tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mostly fine. A few cloudy areas today, warm tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson. Generally fine, but scattered showers tomorrow evening. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places later tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine today with the odd shower. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight and spreading elsewhere tomorrow with heavy falls. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with high cloud. Severe gale northwesterlies in exposed places tomorrow. Southland and Otago, fine today, apart from a few showers about Rakiura, Stewart Island. Scattered rain tomorrow with gale westerlies in exposed places. And Rekohu, Chatham Islands, mainly fine, the odd shower. It is 8 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Labour's election campaign woes continue with the latest TVNZ Varian poll, almost replicating News Hub's Reid Research poll from earlier this week. With just over a month to go until New Zealand goes to the polls, National and ACT are on track to govern comfortably. Labour is down 1% to 28%, National is on 39%, up 2%. The Greens are down 2 to 10% and ACT is also down 3 to 10%. But the major difference in the Varian poll is that it has New Zealand First cracking that 5% threshold, whilst Te Pāti Māori sits steadily at 3%. As for preferred Prime Minister, both Christopher Hipkins and Christopher Luxon, too many Chris's, are tied, rolling 8 ice creams each in a 1-minute challenge at a Christchurch gelato shop this week. And the Varian poll has them neck and neck too, tied at 23% as preferred Prime Minister. David Seymour is at 5% and Winston Peters is at 4%. On those numbers, National would bring 49 MPs to Parliament, which combined with ACT's 13 would allow them to govern narrowly together without New Zealand First's 7 MPs. Our political editor Jane Patterson joins us in the studio to break down those numbers. Okay, let's start with the overall picture first. Jane, same, but slightly different from the earlier poll.
That's right, and I think the One News Varian poll had picked up that discontent with Labour a bit earlier. So in their August poll, they had Labour down at 29, so just under that 30% mark. So maybe that News Hub poll that we saw on Monday was catching up with that discontent a little bit more in terms of the polling cycle. Really, the interesting thing for me is ACT down 3 points in this poll to 10, and New Zealand First, as you said, cracking that 5% threshold that a party needs if they don't have an electorate seat to get into Parliament over the 5%.
Okay, let's break those things down a little bit. You had a conversation with David Seymour. We heard that interview on Monday. Seems like miles ago, but it was only Monday, where he floated this idea that he might only give confidence to the National Party. So that means that they would vote on everything, every financial move that National would make to approve it or not. So do you think that sort of upset some voters? Did they think, could this be a stable government or not?
I think it definitely raises questions about the influence that ACT would have in a potentially National-led government. And I think too, voters are starting to probably think more carefully about the makeup that they want in terms of that government. So ACT has performed really strongly throughout the term. They've garnered a lot of support, but maybe people are starting to look a little bit more strategically about the mix. As you put to David Seymour, do they want National with a sprinkle of ACT as opposed to such a strong dominant influence? But of course the voters will decide that. Also, David Seymour and ACT have come off a rough couple of weeks. So we had the controversy around his comments around the Pacific peoples, then a drop-off of several candidates for judgment and questionable views. So that was in the lead-up to this one as well. So I think you heard a lot more subdued David Seymour speaking to you today, Lisa. Conciliatory, much more conciliatory. But look, it was a really interesting proposal that he put out in terms of that confidence only. But I also would like to note that he does say that a good working relationship, as he was saying to you, with National is their preference. If they don't feel that they are getting where they need or that the amount of change reflected in the vote that ACT could potentially get, that is when they would start looking at those other options like confidence. But clearly, as I said, it raises questions about the amount of influence, especially if you only have two parties. And this is where New Zealand First gets interesting.
Exactly.
If you've only got two parties, that gives ACT a lot of leverage. And he has said that he has committed to changing the government if they're in a position to. He would make Christopher Luxon the Prime Minister, but from there is keeping his options open.
Yeah, and he's also said many a time that he won't work with Winston Peters, right? But then on the other side of the fence, you've got National and Christopher Luxon not willing to rule out Winston Peters. And when you see 62 seats would be their take out of this poll, is he hedging his bets just in case he needs Winston if ACT's numbers drop away and they don't go to National?
Of course he's hedging his bets. If they really didn't need New Zealand First and if they didn't need to keep it as an option, it's much cleaner for Christopher Luxon just to say, absolutely no, we're not going to work with New Zealand First. And that can also have the consequence too of eroding support for New Zealand First if they're not really in the game, if they're not seen as a party that can get in. So Christopher Luxon absolutely keeping his options open, but it wouldn't be enough just with New Zealand First. So this is where you get into the scenario of having potentially the two parties, ACT and New Zealand First, all having to negotiate together if National wants to get over the line. But David Seymour's already said they won't sit around a cabinet table. But look, there are lots of different permutations as we've seen in past governments. Some have confidence in supply, some have coalition. But yeah, they would be fascinating negotiations to be sitting in on.
They would, absolutely. But the interesting thing is that dynamic. You would have a Prime Minister who's come straight off the back of being a first-term MP, dealing with some incredibly strong personalities in making those negotiations. That would make it even more interesting.
Well, you can just see the tactics and the lines now starting to be, to come out. So Christopher Luxon, as I said, holding the line on New Zealand First, really not wanting too much to engage either about what a National ACT government would look like. He has put a position down on some ACT policy, so he poured cold water on the treaty review, said that there's no way that they would scrap the Zero Carbon Act, for example, and I think David Seymour made some comments around slightly softening that policy this week, but Christopher Luxon has been prepared on some elements to come out and say, no, we definitely wouldn't do that, so starting to take some ACT policies off the table. But the scrutiny and the questions are just going to get more intense as these polls show that right bloc is really starting to consolidate. The last slew of polls and the trend really has that right bloc in quite a commanding position. The left bloc still well down. One little ray of sunshine for Chris Hipkins. He's up in this poll by 2 points to 23 and the preferred Prime Minister, still tied with Christopher Luxon also on 23. So his personal popularity, I mean, they're still low, but they're not tanking, so that'll be one thing that they're looking at, that he still is able to at least maintain that level of popularity well out on the campaign trail.
Thanks for the analysis, Jane. That is Jane Patterson, RNZ political editor there. And staying with politics, it was a case of walking into the lion's den for sitting MP Willow Jean Prime when she took part in a candidates meeting in Kerikeri last night. The traditionally blue seat of Northland is currently held by Labour for just the first
first time since 1938. But polls suggest that won't last much longer. Reporter Peter de Graaf went along to gauge the mood.
Kia ora Aotearoa, this is the Taxpayers Union 2023 election debate series coming live from the palatial Homestead Sports Bar in Kerikeri in the mighty Northland.
It was a rollicking, raucous and sometimes outright rude ride when the Taxpayers Union show rolled into town on Tuesday night. For Willow Jean Prime, it was a foray into hostile territory, with a Labour MP all but drowned out by shouts and jeers.
I am proud of what Labour has delivered. When I came into this position of being MP for Northland, we literally had sewage running down the walls in our hospitals.
The strongest reaction, however, came after mention of the C word. That's COVID, of course.
We have had one of the best COVID responses in the world. I acknowledge that there are some...
New Zealand First's Shane Jones lamented Northlanders' habit of electing lions, only to find they turned into lambs when they arrived in Parliament. He also threatened to inflict more of his infamous TikTok videos on the electorate.
The key issues that I've been fighting on is obviously my record of delivery, my also laser-like focus on infrastructure deficit, law and order. In fact, right here in Kerikeri, watch TikTok, more is coming.
National candidate Grant McCallum also promised a laser-like focus, but in his case it would be on costs and the squeezed middle.
Interest rates are high, inflation is high. People are struggling to buy the groceries and pay their rent and pay their mortgages. National has a plan to deal with that. As part of that plan, we're going to have a laser-like focus on reducing spending and also deliver tax cuts to middle New Zealand because they desperately need it.
Democracy NZ candidate Matt King, Northland's former National MP, had by far the loudest supporters. Freedom and farming were his top issues.
For me, we formed the basis of our party on freedom to choose and freedom and rights and our basic human rights. We also are pushing back for farmers because we don't believe that climate change catastrophe narrative that this government and even National seem to be going along, so we're going to fight back.
Meanwhile, ACT List MP Mark Cameron just wanted less government.
Get the government out of people's lives and I think you would all agree, actually allow us as New Zealanders to do stuff. There's far too much red tape and regulation in the lives of New Zealanders.
Plenty of humour offered relief from the serious politicking. When New Zealand First was accused of being more interested in culture war talking points than real issues, the MCs asked, with some trepidation, how Mr Jones defined a woman.
Matua Shane Jones has 19 mohopunas. He has his beautiful wife sitting right in front. Bro, that's a woman.
The last word went to Ms Prime, who warned a change of government would lead to service cuts. But it's not clear if anyone heard.
There is a lot at stake in this election, and I implore you all to ask the questions and do your research.
Thank you.
A Taxpayers Union courier poll released on the night gave National 43% of the Northland electorate vote, followed by Labour on 18% and New Zealand First on 13%. Democracy NZ and the Greens both had 4% support, with ACT trailing on 2%. The poll had a relatively small sample size of 400 and a margin of error of almost 5%.
To the US now, and the political divide is deepening, with President Joe Biden now facing an impeachment inquiry. In a shock statement, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has accused the president of an abuse of power and being involved in a culture of corruption over his son's foreign business dealings. The ABC's Jade McMillan has more.
House Republicans have already spent months digging into Joe Biden's family, accusing him of profiting from the foreign business dealings of his son Hunter Biden while he was Vice President. But in a brief statement before the cameras, Speaker Kevin McCarthy announced a significant escalation of those investigative efforts.
These are allegations of abuse of power, obstruction, and corruption, and they warrant further investigation by the House of Representatives. That's why today I am directing our House committee to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden.
The White House has described the inquiry as extreme politics at its worst, arguing Republicans have failed to turn up any evidence of the president's wrongdoing. Democrat Jerry Connolly is on the House Oversight Committee and told CNN the accusations are baseless.
I've looked at depositions in a classified setting. I've looked at hearing transcripts. I've interrogated witnesses, and there has been not a scintilla of evidence that would suggest in any way or allow even an inference to be drawn that President Joe Biden has done anything untoward.
The Speaker issued the directive without first putting it to a vote on the House floor, despite previously saying he'd do so. And the President's allies have accused him of giving in to the demands of hard-right members of his own party, like Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, who'd threatened to try to remove Mr McCarthy from his position if he didn't move on the issue.
Moments ago, Speaker McCarthy endorsed an impeachment inquiry. This is a baby step following weeks of pressure from House Conservatives to do more. We must move faster.
The inquiry is likely to involve months of both public and private hearings and could be a first step towards a House vote on whether to impeach Joe Biden. If that happened, it would still be up to the Democrat-controlled Senate to decide whether to remove him from office, something that hasn't happened to a president before. Bill Golston is a senior fellow at the Washington-based think tank, the Brookings Institution.
It is a hopeless endeavour, but they hope in the process of staging this inquiry to weaken President Biden's chances of re-election in November of 2024.
A contest in which he could be up against his twice impeached predecessor, Donald Trump.
In Morocco, the rescue operation has turned to one of recovery with little hope of finding any more people alive after the weekend's devastating earthquake. Residents in remote areas say they've been digging out the bodies of their loved ones with their bare hands. The BBC's Arabic team has been to one of the closest towns to the epicentre of the quake. Their reporter Karine Torbay filed this report from the Atlas Mountains.
This is the village of Duwar Tarka. There were about 100 homes here. People have been digging through the rubble since the deadly earthquake hit on Friday. Now that the rescue teams have arrived, the search continues for any bodies. Days after the earthquake, there's no more hope to find any survivors in this village. These rescuers are looking for 3 bodies: a grandfather, a father, and a toddler. They are doing so with their bare hands. This is also how Ed Abdullah Hussein searched for his wife, son, and daughter, whose bodies he recovered hours after the earthquake hit.
My wife was here. There was my daughter. She was like this. And over there, my son. I dug with my own hands, and with the help of some people here, we pulled their bodies out. I lost my kids. I lost everything. I appeal for the authorities and His Majesty the King to help me. May they rest in peace. Amen.
آمين يا رب آمين يا رب آمين آمين يا رب آمين آمين يا رب آمين إلي. The only people trapped under the rubble who survived were those rescued by the villagers the night the earthquake struck.
There were 5 of us. We went from one home to another, calling the residents by name, from door to door. We only focused on the houses from which people answered. Where we didn't get a reply, we moved on. We had to.
Over-tourism is threatening the UNESCO heritage status of Japan's iconic Mount Fuji. As another hectic climbing season comes to an end, a record 4 million visitors were clocked at the Sabaru base station. As CNN's Christy Lou Stout reports, despite best efforts to control the crowds and the impact on the environment, the mountain is facing a real crisis.
Human traffic jams on sacred Mount Fuji.
Very cool. Just like a traffic jam.
An ambulance en route to an injured hiker. Litter on the mountainside. It's a side to Japan's popular tourist site that is not in the guidebooks. But for Mount Fuji ranger Miho Sakurai, it's just another day on the job.
There are definitely too many people on Mount Fuji at the moment. The numbers are much higher than before.
Famous for its snow-capped volcano, Mount Fuji has inspired artists and been a pilgrimage site for centuries. Less than 2 hours away from Tokyo, Japan's highest peak attracts visitors globally, and in 2013 became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Over-tourism has become a big problem. This year, a post-COVID tourism boom has brought thousands more hikers to Mount Fuji, according to a Yamanashi prefectural government official. The environmental damage being done could cost Mount Fuji its heritage status, according to the local government.
Fuji-san is screaming out in pain. We can't just wait for improvement. We need to tackle over-tourism now.
Volunteers take away tons of trash each year. Climbers are urged to donate $7 to help keep the mountain clean, but not everyone pays up. And Sakurai says some behavior is even harder to control.
People of all experience levels come here, including first-timers. We want to prevent accidents, so we give them advice.
The risk of altitude sickness and hypothermia has been increased by a trend called bullet climbing, where hikers begin their ascent at night, pushing on until dawn, according to the Yamanashi Tourism Board. According to the local government, they start their hike from a place called Fuji's 5th Station, where the number of climbers arriving here from Tokyo has more than doubled between 2012 and 2019. The local government also says it wants to shift from quantity to quality tourism. It says replacing the main road to Fuji with a light rail system would be a more sustainable solution.
A Dutch art detective nicknamed the Indiana Jones of the art world has recovered a painting by Vincent van Gogh which was stolen more than 3 years ago. The artwork, worth millions of dollars, was taken from a museum in the Netherlands while it was closed during the pandemic. Arthur Brand worked with the police to negotiate the safe return of the 19th century painting and says it was one of the greatest moments of his life. The BBC's Paul Moss reports.
It wasn't the most sophisticated crime. The thief used a sledgehammer to smash through the glass doors at the Singer-Laren Museum near Amsterdam and ran off with the painting under his arm. A man known as Niels M. was arrested and subsequently convicted of the theft, but nobody knew where the picture had gone. Until now. Arthur Brand is a self-styled art detective with a track record of recovering missing works. He was contacted by a man who he says wanted to hand over the painting because apparently it was a headache to hold on to. Shortly afterwards, it was delivered to Mr. Brand, covered in bubble wrap, he says, and carried in a blue IKEA bag. He posted a video on social media shortly afterwards.
Stolen 3.5 years ago on Van Gogh's birthday. It's one of the early works by Van Gogh. It's back. It took 1300 days, but here it is, and I will hand it over in a few moments to the museum director.
The museum says Parsonage Garden at Dunedin in spring will go back on public display next year. But history suggests it won't be the last Van Gogh painting to go missing. 28 have been stolen and then recovered over the past few decades. An unusual but perhaps rather direct form of compliment to the Netherlands' most famous artist.
Well, that is it from us, but do stay tuned. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. If you missed anything from the program, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from and listen back to whatever you like. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up's Leonard Powell continues his road trip around the East Cape to Tokomaru Bay, where damaged roads mean a trip to Gisborne takes twice as long as normal. Do tune in for that one. Have a fantastic evening. Set the alarm, boil up a coffee. 5 a.m. first up, and we'll catch you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Paul Marie, Koivi Ashton Thenne. The National Party is up 2 points in the latest One News Varian poll on 39%, but ACT, National's potential governing partner, is down 3 points to 10%. The parties still remain on course to govern, although 10% of people polled were either undecided or refused to say who they'd vote for. The Department of Corrections says it's been making a concerted effort over prison staff. It's currently in mediated pay bargaining with unions. Authorities in Vietnam have yet to confirm the